Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome to my channel. I'm here to do the mid-year book freakout tag for 2022. Am I a month behind? Yes. Does that track for me? Also yes. So let's just get into it. So I will have all of the questions linked down below in the description, as well as the links to the YouTube creators pages for the two people that created the tag, as far as I can tell. This is my absolute first year doing this, so I'm not exactly sure how the freakout tag works. It's partly why I'm so late at doing it, because I've never seen it before. I'm brand new to the booktube community just this year, but hopefully you'll find something in here that you enjoy. All right, so the very first question is, best book you've read so far? That's easy. The Count of Monte Cristo, Alexandre Dumas. This book was amazing. It is my all-time favorite book now. I plan on going back and annotating because I just started annotating it this much of the way through the book, so like the last sixth of the book or something. Oh, I think I will be reading this book once a year for the rest of my life. Absolutely loved it. I recommend it to anybody who loves a good story. So this is an adventure tale of a man who was falsely imprisoned when he was 19 years old. He spent between 14 and 20 years in prison. I'm a little blurry on the dates because of the way that it describes it. He gets out and he finds the world's greatest fortune. He met somebody in prison who he befriended. They were going to escape together, and at the time of escape, his friend said, hey, if we get out, here's this treasure that I haven't told you about, and we're going to split it 50-50, and if you are the only one who makes it out, here's where you find it, it's all yours. So he finds this treasure. He's like the richest man in the world now, but he is very much flying under the radar, and he's getting revenge on the people who falsely imprisoned him, who made a conspiracy, and those who went along with it to keep him imprisoned. This book, just from the first page, I mean, it starts moving. This book is not at all too long for the story that it's telling. It's never dragging. It was never boring. The psychology of how he's going to destroy each person individually. He doesn't want to kill anybody, but he wants to exact the worst revenge possible per person. But it's also a story of redemption, and it's a story of good things coming to the people who really deserve them. And those were actually my favorite parts in this book. So 5-star read. Please do not be afraid of this book based on the size. It will feel half the size because you're just going to want to keep the story to keep going. So highly, highly, highly recommend The Count of Monte Cristo. Question 2. The best sequel you've read so far. So I don't really read sequels. I don't read book series, at least not right now. Most of what I read is classic literature. I do read some contemporary, I read some mysteries. So I don't really have a sequel per se, but I am going to use this very loosely as a sequel. It's called Honolulu by Alan Brennert. It was written by the same author who wrote Molokai, which was the first book of his that I read. So it takes place in the same basic area, and it just follows the story of somebody new. So like I said, it's not exactly a sequel, but it does somewhat relate to his first book. So I'm going to very loosely say that this is the closest thing to a sequel that I've read. So this follows a Korean picture bride who is basically duped into, like many of the picture brides were, into coming to Hawaii to marry a man that they had seen their photograph of, and to have this wonderful, beautiful, wealth-filled life in Hawaii. And that doesn't happen. So it follows Jean, whose name early on in the story, based on what her parents gave her, is called Regret. But she chooses her own name later on. And it follows her primarily, and then some of the other picture brides that she ended up on the ship with coming to Hawaii, and how their lives change, how they choose to take control of their lives or settle into the lives that they have, And this was just an excellent book. I want to say I gave this 4 or 4.5 stars when I read it earlier this year. So again, highly recommend if you're interested in any of the topics talked about in here. It addresses racism, it addresses classism, it addresses xenophobia, it addresses colonialism as far as the Hawaiian people and their last queen. The last queen of Hawaii is mentioned in this as a tiny minor character, as a historical reference. I believe her name was Lili Okupualani, if I'm not mistaken. I might have to double check that. But just a fantastic read, and the closest thing to a sequel that I've got on the list. Okay, question number 3 is a new release you haven't read yet, but you want to. So I really am going to struggle with some of these freak out tags because, like I said, I primarily stick to classic literature. You can't really have a new release on classic literature. And I mean, I'm not talking modern classics, and even modern classics, it takes time for them to become even a modern classic. So I don't have one. I'm still so new to the booktube community, and I'm just getting introduced to newer authors, newer books, newer series. So I don't really have anything that I know of as a new release or a new author that I'm super interested in. So maybe by next year's mid-year freakout, I will have an actual answer for this one. So we're gonna go to number 4, which is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. And I do actually have one for this. I've seen this on a couple of people's channels. I've seen it on Goodreads. I've seen it on Barnes & Noble pre-order lists. And this is called Babel, and I will put a picture up. I don't know much about the story. I don't know anything about the author, but the way that I've seen other people describe it is definitely interesting. It sounds kind of like a dark academia where books and words have power to change the world. And that's really all I know about it, but it is something that interests me, and I do think I will be looking at that when that does come out. So I'm gonna say my most anticipated release is Babel. Okay, number 5. Biggest disappointment. That's easy. It was 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This was my first Murakami book, and I have heard, since I joined BookTube, I have heard so much about him as an author and how incredible he is. And I really, really, really wanted to read one of his novels. I really wanted to like his books. So I bought his ebook. I don't even know if I got halfway through. And I talked about this in one of my early videos, one of my wrap-ups. I didn't care for the repetitiveness of his writing. I understand that it was completely intentional, and there is a point to it. I don't think it felt like it was well done. I'm sure people are going to disagree with me. That's completely fine. If you loved that book, that's awesome. I just felt that it was poorly done. I don't think it was, at least for me as a reader, it was not getting across what he was trying to get across. But that really wasn't even my biggest problem with the book. My biggest problem with the book was the fact that he was putting certain groups of people, certain types of individuals in a negative light when I felt like it shouldn't have been put in a negative light, or vice versa, where something was either excused or almost condoned, and I don't think it should have been. And it's not that there were characters that did bad things. A lot of stories have that. Most stories need that. It was, to me, it felt like the author was trying to convince the reader that something that was good was really bad and something that was bad was actually good. And I didn't care for that, especially considering the subject matter of the book. Once I kind of got far enough into it and I started to understand what that subject matter, what the book is really about. And it just left a really bad taste in my mouth, and so I put it down. I do plan on picking something else up from Murakami eventually. I might just start chronologically with his work. I'm not really sure. but this one just didn't do it for me. So my biggest disappointment was definitely 1Q84. Okay, so next is number 6, and that was your biggest surprise. This is also very easy for me. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. If you've seen my earlier videos, especially my wrap-up where I talk about Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen was a writer I swore I would never read. I had no interest in romance. I had no interest in classic romance. If that's the entire point of the book, I felt like it would just not be worth my time. I wouldn't be interested in it. I assumed that as a female writing a romance novel back in the late 1800s, it was going to be flowery and, you know, societal values and norms that I don't care for, or I don't agree with, or I can't identify with. And so from a young age, I swore I would never read the Bronte sisters. I would never read Jane Austen. I would never read any books in this vein. And then I kind of got over myself and I picked up Pride and Prejudice at the beginning of the year when I started to read again for the first time in about a decade. And I fully expected to hate this book. And I was hoping to at least tolerate it. And oh my gosh, I loved this book. This was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely loved this book. It didn't follow any of the annoying tropes that I tend to associate with romance, with rom-coms, because this is kind of a rom-com in a way, in book form. And it just really, really surprised me how much I loved this. So Jane Austen's writing is actually very clean, especially for the time period that she was writing this in. I really expected to struggle a lot with the wording choice, the way that dialect was going to be written, and I had absolutely no problem with that at all. She was funny, she was witty, the banter between her characters was excellent, but I think the thing that I really appreciated the most was that her characters felt like real people, because part of what I really dislike about any book, but I think particularly romance, is I feel like characters do not respond to normal situations like normal people in these books. Simple misunderstandings that a 30-second or less conversation could resolve ends up being 200 pages of, you know, storyline, and I just find that ridiculous. But I loved that the characters in this book, to me, felt like they reacted to things like real people. And it didn't have I think it's like a 3-part arc of a story where, you know, there's introduction and then there's conflict and then there's resolution. And that conflict, especially in romances, again, it's one of those things where it's usually a misunderstanding or miscommunication that could be solved in a very quick conversation. Boom, done. Are you an adult? Then act like it. And I did not suffer with the conflict part of the story because it didn't overdo it. And I just felt that everything was really natural. The characters were, I mean, they really felt like they were real people that she knew, and she just wrote down their life story. And she did it in such a great way. So I have a couple of other Jane Austen books now that I am going to be reading hopefully this year. And it's all thanks to my biggest surprise of the year, Pride and Prejudice. Okay, number 7, favorite new author. So I should just leave this out because unfortunately, or fortunately for me, this book covers so many of the tags. Alexandre Dumas, this is the first book I've ever read by him. Loved it. This is my all-time favorite book. He is right now my favorite author. And I loved it. And I love him. And I cannot wait to read everything possible from this man. And we're just gonna set that right there. Okay, number 8, newest fictional crush. I don't know what to say. Oddly enough, physicality-wise, he is my type. I go for guys with more like the lean physique. I'm not into the huge muscles. He has dark hair. I don't know what it is, but I love dark hair on guys. He's described as looking like a vampire, and the whole pale skin thing, I like it. I don't mind it at all. But really his personality, and even though he was basically an angel of vengeance personified in this book, he was always still very, very human in it. And he also felt such deep love for people who were just good at heart. And I kind of have a crush on Edmond Dantes. So he is the Count of Monte Cristo. I don't think that's going to be the last time I pick up that book. Okay, number 9, newest favorite character. I'm kidding. So actually, Dante, from Dante's Inferno. This guy was hilarious. I tried reading this book years and years ago. I want to say maybe high school, and I wasn't feeling it, so I DNF'd it then, and I revisited it now, and it was hilarious. But the narrator is the author, so Dante is writing as though he himself is being led by Virgil through the 9 circles of hell, and this guy is hilarious in his descriptions. Apparently he also knows a ton of people in hell, which I find really sus, but he's sarcastic, he is humorous. I just really actually enjoyed following his descent to hell. And so I've only read the first part. There are 3 parts to the Divine Comedy, and next will be Purgatory, and then Paradise. So I'm going to be reading each of these separately. I believe they were originally published separately. They're technically 3 different books. I just have the Divine Comedy as a trilogy. But yeah, Dante was my newest favorite character. So number 10. I think it's 10. Book that made you cry. Don't hate me. Don't hate me. I didn't read any books that actually made me cry. I'm just saying, this is literally like the only one that made me tear up. Did I bawl? No, not at all. And the thing that made me tear up was when he was nice to someone, because it was a good person that deserved something nice, and the good person got like the best gift that they could have gotten, and they died happy years later after having a lovely, charmed life. That made me tear up. So that's the closest thing I've got. I'm sorry. Next year, I swear next year will be better. I will have read more books. But yeah, for now, I think this is the last time we're going to talk about it, but I'm going to leave it here just in case. So number 11 is a book that made you happy. I am not going to pick the same book. I'm going to say The Manual of Detection by Jedediah Barry. This is like a film noir crossed with a fever dream if you've taken a little bit of acid. But none of it is super intense, so it's like a really mild version of all of that combined. This book makes me happy. I mean, first of all, look how pretty that is. But the story is of a detective who goes missing, and his clerk gets promoted to take his place, and his clerk just wants to go back to life as normal. He wants the detective to come back. He wants to go back to his cubicle, write up the reports, put them in their files, and go home, and then come back the next day and do the exact same thing. So he either has to find the missing detective or solve the case that the detective was on, or both if they're connected. He wants to get that done as fast as possible. And I just found him so charming because same, like, I just want to do my job and log out and be done. And I don't want to have a million times the responsibility or an exciting, danger-filled adventure life. I just want to sit in my cubicle and do my job. And I just felt so much with this character. His name is Unwin. And it just made me smile. This book is so, so, so incredibly charming, and it's short, it's easy to get through, and I just loved it. Most beautiful book you've bought so far or have received. I'm sorry, you're not going to beat this cover. front and back. Look at that. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, and I love it. Okay, so number 13. What books do you need to read by the end of the year? So along the lines of the Count of Monte Cristo, I absolutely want to get through Alexandre Dumas's The Three Musketeers. This is a series. Hey, look, I'm going to read a series. The Three Musketeers comes first, and then it's like 10 years later, I think, is the next book, and then it's something like 20 years after that is the title of the next book, and then it finishes out the series on the fourth book, The Man in the Iron Mask. And so I really want to get to The Man in the Iron Mask. The Three Musketeers was probably never going to be my first choice. I'm not super into the story of them. I never really have been, but when I found out that he was the same person who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, it definitely gave me a lot more impetus to read this. So I absolutely want to get through this chonky boy. He writes chonky books. Look at that. And I love a good chonky book. So yeah, Three Musketeers is my first, absolutely want to get through. And then, I don't know why it took me so long to find that. Okay. I want to get to 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I would say of the books that I have that I want to get to this year, these are my two biggest ones. I've heard that this is a very deep and deeply affecting book. So I'm hoping that I will have the emotional capacity sometime this year to sit down and dedicate my heart and soul to this book. If I don't have the emotional capacity, though, I don't think I'm going to start it, because I don't want to do a disservice to the book. So, but those are my two goals: the action adventure novel, The Three Musketeers, and 100 Years of Solitude, which I am expecting to rip my heart out and absolutely destroy me. So, and that's it. That is my 2022 mid-year book freakout tag. So thank you so much for joining, and let me know down below what your responses are to the freakout tag. Like I said, I'm going to have the list of questions in the description box along with links to the original creators' YouTube pages. But tell me what your books are. What are your answers to this year's tag? And if you have your own content, or if you have favorite content creators that you like to watch for the mid-year freakout tag, leave me those down below. I always love finding new booktubers that I just have not come across yet, and I think this mid-year freakout tag is a great way to get a little picture of somebody's taste in books, and I think that's such a good way to find creators that you kind of resonate with. So leave me something down in the comments below to give me your suggestions for other creators, and let me know what your answers are to the book freakout tag. So that's all I have for today. I'm Cam. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.